confident about expressing it. We have to keep the high moral ground. And frankly, I would even say that from time to time we need perhaps a bit of passion, because the times are hard, and just repeating sort of communique paragraph 15, whether it's European Union communique or NATO, all high quality stuff, may not be enough. But if a lot of people, and I've been here also, the discussion which takes place in the blogosphere, if you like, let's just say what we really think, if, of course, we believe what we say. I'll end on that, particularly as I've again destroyed this delicate apparatus. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Robert. I think someone can come and help you with that again. Just before I open up for Andras and for Oscar to give their perspectives and to comment on what you just said, out of pure curiosity, you touched upon this already, but you work as head of NATO Information Office in Moscow. How is that, and how do you do it?
Well, one interview I've given the journalist described, the title said, interview with the guy who has the most difficult job in the world. I don't know about that, because I'm still well paid and it was interesting, but speaking very, very seriously, when I arrived, I've devoted 15 years of my life to sort of developing relations with Russia, and always been like, sinusoid, heck, and So, and I came in 2010, which was after the summit in Lisbon, which is a good time, and so on. The problem is it's all been downhill. Missile defense, remember, big issue out of nothing, and complete sort of. The thing which I'm particularly why I talk about NGOs and so on, is civil society. Is the people who try to have a debate. The people, for example, who try to organize a seminar this in Moscow. No problem. Until like 2-3 years ago. And now these people, anybody who tries to have any sort of cooperation, but just some engagement, they may be in trouble. And I'll, even for their safety, I'll save mentioning any names, but we're talking about, serious institutions, universities, distinguished think tanks, and so on. That's the saddest thing of all, the Russia, as I said, of our dreams. I don't see it, the pockets and, lots of people emigrating, which means they don't really see the future. So it's a highly unpleasant environment. And my biggest worry is the young generation, because with everything that they've been taught, I really don't know whether, even if there is a decision at the top to change the course of that ship, right? It might take a long time to sort of to change it, because the damage has been done. And that worries me, because I think Russia, it's potentially a great country. We would like Russia to be successful, even powerful. But, as already been mentioned, modernization programs, it's not there. Name me one product, okay, Kaspersky, which you can buy apart from oil and so on. It's sad. It's really sad. So I've left Russia with a feeling of frustration and but also sadness, because there is sufficient number of security problems in the world that we would love to tackle together with Russia. And we'll be doing that in different areas. But at the moment, it seems Russia itself, unfortunately, has become part of the problem. And that is very, very sad.
All right, thank you, Robert. We'll have reason to come back to that later on in this panel. But first, Andras, would you like to give your comments, perspectives, etc.?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be back in Stockholm after I had the pleasure to be an intern at SIPRI in 2007 for 3 months. It's great to be back here, really, so thank you. What we discussed with Katarina in advance, instead of trying to solve the riddle hidden in a mystery and something else, what Churchill said and I never remember, enigma, yes, I will try to start with a narrower perspective. Because this narrower perspective, of course, is connected to Ukraine. Surprise, surprise. The research question is very easy. Where else could Russia do that? Because since the war in Ukraine started with the Crimea operation, there have been a lot of discussion about the Russians call it new generation warfare. The West, after some hesitation, started to call it hybrid warfare, which is factually wrong, but still we got adopted it. and this is what's part of the discourse. It's wrong, but let's stick to it. And the expression hybrid warfare then made it back to the Russian language. If you now search on Hybridnaya Vojna, you will have a lot of hits. And Russians are discussing how we discuss their warfare. So since the war started, hybrid warfare became really a hit, and General Valery Gerasimov became much more famous by his article than he had ever planned or wanted to be. Everyone is discussing that. And last year and even beginning of this year, there has been a perception that this hybrid war is kind of a Wunderwaffe. Little green man could show up anywhere. And it's the danger lurking around, sword of Damocles, whatever. No. If one takes a closer look at the operational experiences of the Ukraine events, there are a number of prerequisites, absolute prerequisites necessary for a full-scale hybrid operation. Every word matters here. Full-scale means where open violence is included and also territorial capture/land grab is included. Why full-scale is important? If one studies new generation warfare, not according to our perception, but how the Russians study it, and if you want to understand your adversary's thinking, it's useful to use their logical categories. Because if we try to use our categories to describe their thinking, we're may get seriously wrong. We have to think the way they think, not by sympathizing them, just understand. So if you look at how they think about new generation warfare, the beginning of a new generation war is actually the careful studying and mapping out of your enemy. Careful studying may mean decades. In Russian military thinking, ever since the 1920s, yes, 1920s, since Trotsky, it's been present, the so-called initial phase of the war, which begins well before the enemy would even notice it. To map out the weaknesses, the weak points, the cracks, the possible entry points. This phase doesn't differ much from the conventional activities of Soviet/Russian diplomacy. This is not what we are going to talk about here. What we are going to talk about here in the remaining 7.5 minutes is that when it develops further, when open aggression becomes part of the game. That's what I call full-scale hybrid operation. And the prerequisites, the absolute prerequisites of such an operation, first, new generation warfare is not a replacement of a conventional war. This is a misunderstanding. I mean, hybrid war doesn't mean that Russia is unable to wage conventional wars anymore. Of course they are able to do so. This is what we see in Syria. This is what we keep seeing all over in the North Caucasus still. New generation warfare adds new methods to the way of fighting wars. Some of these new methods are even visible in Syria. For example, long-distance warfare, precision weapons, special operational forces, proxies, denied involvement, all that. But the first prerequisite of a full-scale hybrid operation is still military superiority. The example I tell everywhere, and those ones, sorry for those ones who've heard been more than once, so they already heard that. The research question is very easy. Why little green men were not shot in the head in the very first moment when they show up? You shoot them, they die. Tried, proven, works. Why it didn't take place? Because Ukraine was afraid of the conventional and possibly nuclear military superiority of Russia. Right in time of the Crimea operation, there were tens of thousands of high mobile professional mechanized infantry and tank Russian troops, armored troops, lined up right on the border of Ukraine. Ukraine didn't dare to move. Not independently from the Western advices and polite requests, please don't do anything stupid. But still, conventional military superiority was a key element in the success. Meaning, if conventional military superiority can be negated, then the whole thing doesn't even start. If you read Gerasimov with eyes open, he argues, and not only Gerasimov, but Chekhinov, Bogdanov, Frolov, and all the others, they argue that this new generation warfare is a combination of military and non-military means. The ratio of them is 1:4, meaning it's dominantly non-military, but also meaning that military is still an essential part. You can't get rid of military superiority. It's still a must. Prerequisite number 2. Such type of warfare works against weak states, weak leadership, weak society, corrupted elites, and I mean, the pre-Crimea Ukraine was a terrible corrupted state. But the Russian discourse that it was a failed state, it's not necessarily true, it's more propaganda than reality, but terrible corruption was, a key problem, and I'm not sure whether past tense is adequate here. And Russians could take a really brilliant use of all these weaknesses, including the things that President Yanukovych didn't trust in anybody at all. When he negotiated with the Kwasniewski Cox group, he was always negotiating alone. Even the interpreter was different at each and every time, and I know this for a fact, because he didn't trust anybody. And what was his original education? A petty criminal, not that young anymore. Probably he made mistakes because he didn't trust anybody, and this is what weak leadership is. You have no one to trust. You may actually fail. Weak leadership, weak state, weakly functioning administration, including heavy corruption, is also an essential element of the success. Against a well-governed, non-corrupted, democratic state in which its population trusts, not necessarily loving the actual government, but trusting the state. This kind of warfare is much less effective, if effective at all. Prerequisite number 3, again, it was essential in the Ukrainian case. It's useful if there are existing tensions in the society. Let them be ethnic tensions, religious tensions. Of course, you can play a lot on them. You can exaggerate them. You can picture them via your information warfare as to be much more serious than they actually are. But utilizing the weaknesses of the enemy, it requires that the enemy should have some weaknesses, some cracks in the society, some unresolved tensions, and they are very careful in exploring those weaknesses and then exploiting those weaknesses. Prerequisite number 4, which was an important case, or a very interesting case. In both cases, they were using the universal argument that protection of the Russian speakers there. One may think that it's essential to have the Russian speakers there because then Russia could claim that they are protecting the rights of the Russian speakers. In fact, most of the Russian speakers were not that much involved. It's very interesting. Most of the Russian speakers in the eastern Ukraine, they were passive. The largest demonstration we've seen in Donetsk, a city of 1 million, was 3,000. Crimea was a bit different, but most of the population Russian-speaking population was either passive or were explicitly against. We were very lucky because just before the Donetsk operation, really unfolded, there was the last opinion poll conducted in the Donbass, early April 2014. And it came out there that only 30% supported active separatism. Everybody else was basically against. Wider autonomy, okay. Bit modifying the relationship to Kiev, also okay. But active separatism getting away, small minority supported it only. It's not true that all the Russian speakers were in favor of separatism. This was just the claim Russia tried to make. It's useful to have Russian speakers, of course, because of tactical and operational reasons. Little green men can easily conceal themselves to be locals. Imagine them trying to do the same in Helsinki, pretending that they are Finnish. Good luck. But still, for operational, tactical reasons, it's necessary. But the role of Russian speakers is actually much less than many people claim here. Another one is very obvious, no need to waste more than a sentence. Media and informational superiority, Russia clearly had that. And prerequisite number 6, that's the last one, logistics. You need to supply the operation. And what we can draw from Ukraine as a lesson. Scenario number 1 is the Crimea, where you have Russian bases on the ground which serve the logistical basis of the whole operation. Ammunition, food, shelter, board, evacuation of the wounded, replacements, all that. So Crimea was easy. Even they themselves already say that they could do that because they had already boots on the ground. Option number 2, direct neighboring with Russia, so being directly a neighbor of Russia and having weak and or non-existent border control. This was the eastern Ukrainian case. Without such a logistical support, you cannot sustain a meaningful operation. It's impossible, at least according to what we have in Ukraine. Syria belongs to category 1. They have already boots on the ground. Which leads us to the conclusion, where else can Russia do that? All the requirements are met at present in 2 countries of the post-Soviet region. Ukraine, again, and Georgia. Almost all prerequisites are met in other 2 countries, Kazakhstan and Belarus, where all the prerequisites are met except the weak leadership. Because both President Lukashenko and both President Nazarbayev were really strong leaders on the top of a well-functioning vertical. If something happens to them, then all the prerequisites will or could be fulfilled if necessary. The other countries are actually much less vulnerable, and please keep in mind military superiority is still a must for a full-scale hybrid operation. Sorry for being long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anders. I would truly recommend, or I do truly recommend, the report on hybrid warfare that Andras has written for the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. You have the full title in the pamphlet, so I really recommend you to read it. We will talk more about hybrid and the possibilities of hybrid in a Nordic-Baltic context that I imagine that many of you are interested in. But first we'll hear Oscar's thoughts and comments. Please.
Thank you very much. I am both sad and happy to be here. Sad because I was very close to miss the conference. So I don't know the brilliant speeches that's been made today. But I'm very happy to make it because, and it's also, then I've been to all of them, which were quite few have been, I think, when I look around. I've been asked to speak a little bit about Russia's next geopolitical move and Russian strategy. And I would firstly start warning about the fallacy of thinking of strategy as plans. Plans is a very small part of strategy. Strategy is rather an interdependent, dynamic process. It's a coherent idea of ends, ways, and means, an idea that unite ends, ways, and means in a process, I would say. So if going through these three topics, to start with the means, Anders has spoken about them. What does Russia have? They have the conventional armed forces, they have a information warfare machinery, they have a worldwide intelligence network with political influence operations. They have nuclear weapons, as we mentioned before. They have corruption, which is kind of sport, connected to organized crime. What are the ways in which they can use these? And I would say the first thing that strikes particularly about the Russian strategy is that they have a lot greater tendency to use force. The threshold to use force is a lot less. And that's one of the key truisms in military theory. If one side, war is the battle of wills, and if one side have the readiness to use force, that will give utility to that side. So if you take Syria, for instance, as an example, the way that force has been applied has not been with perfect precision and flawless. Rather, it's been quite typically Russian, with its faults here and there, dumb bombs, blanket bombings, cruise missiles that's been falling in Iran, etc. But that's not the key point. The key point is it has been fulfilling, I would say, the Russian objectives, even disregarding the status of the armed forces, because they have the will to use force. Another way in which Russia applies its means is that it's unpredictable, deceptive, they lie, which surprises us kind of from time to time, united and confident, just as NATO was being wanted to do. And they apply these means kind of in any way strikes against the West. And this ties in a bit to the end of, because the West is seen as the main enemy of Russia. So any way that weakens the West, and that you can go, as you're saying, to understand Russia with the Russians' own terms. And one way of explaining information warfare is the struggle between two social systems in the information sphere. So the struggle between two social systems sounds quite far from military theory, but I think this perfectly encapsulates the Russian thinking, the system thinking. Because you need so many components to make a system work, as our societies are complex systems. Whichever ways in which these can be hindered, that's where it's being struck. And that's, you can take the example, you look at extremists from all across the spectrum and all across Europe. The ideological tension between them they're completely separate, so there's no grand ideology behind them. It's pure cold pragmatism, because they unite in the common way that they're weakening the West. One way in which the Russian toolbox is being used is also against economic targets. This is very interesting, and it's been reported last week about the mapping of underwater cable. I like to take the example of the Russian illegalist that was being charged in the States, and he was being charged by the FBI, and that's why the transcripts for phone tapping were public. The goal of the illegalist in New York was finding out how the automatic trading system could be disrupted. And this says a lot about the Russian understanding of us, because as the Ukrainian war has shown, us in the West are very unhappy to accept economic pain for geopolitical gains. So striking against the economic system is one way of really getting a symmetrical advantage against the West. Another way, as you mentioned, Abkhazia, the first Abkhaz war, I think another way, which is very revealing, was the support first of what appeared to be separatists. When that effort came to halt, a ceasefire was negotiated. Then Russia supplied them and came and gave assistance with conventional military means, which was exactly the same way Minsk I and Minsk II, and the operation in Ukraine has done. What are the ends then? If that is a very short way of describing the means and the ways. Well, in one end, I would say, well, there is no end, because strategy is an ongoing process. And that is, you don't have the full plan. You don't say, well, we're going to take East Berlin and then we're going to stop there. Rather, it's a reflection to circumstances wherever, as we were into, wherever opportunity presents, you take use of that. And then in this dynamic process, it's supposed to be read as a dialogue between the two different entities. So, for instance, Russia takes part of Georgia with military force, and half a year later, all the troubles are being dropped against that. Well, you repeat the same in Ukraine, and as it looks now, the troubles from that, the Western sanction might be dropped. This is communication. What does this tell Russia about the cost of using military force to fulfill its geopolitical goals? If every time they do it,